Thank you. Thank you. It is great to be here. It is always better to be given a platform rather than having one taken away, I will say that. I am the CEO of the Babylon Bee, the world's most trusted, factually accurate news source. It sounds like some of you have heard of it. We've actually surpassed The Onion, as you saw in that video, and we've now become the second most popular satire site, just behind CNN.com. So we are climbing in the rankings very rapidly. Hope to overtake them soon. CEO is my official title. The media has given me some other titles, though. They've referred to me a few other ways. They've called me a social media agitator. They've called me an internet provocateur. An unassuming middle-aged man. I'm assuming. A far-right progenitor of disinformation. I kind of like that one. For a role in prompting Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, the Washington Post referred to me as one of Musk's shadow crew misfits, whatever that means. And recently, a reporter described me as an expert online troll. That's actually my favorite. What can you hope to learn tonight from an expert online troll? Probably not much. I do run a comedy site, though, that's been repeatedly fact-checked, smeared, and censored, and that's seen nearly 100 of its jokes come true as if they were prophecies instead of punchlines. So I think I have a somewhat unique perspective on the madness that's resulted from our culture's all-out war on reality and reason. And there is a war, by the way, on reality and reason. Hopefully you've noticed that. It's not hyperbole to say that. In fact, it actually feels like a severe understatement to put it in those terms. I don't even know if I can describe how dire the situation is. But I do know that it's easy to become so accustomed to madness that we become numb to it. And I think we need to resist that tendency. We need to continually remind ourselves that our culture's craziness isn't normal or good or deserving of our acceptance. It must be consciously and constantly resisted. I hope you guys can agree with me on this. There is no such thing as a family-friendly drag show. Do you agree? There is no such thing as a safe abortion. There's no such thing as a pregnant man. I hope we're all clear on that one. There is no such thing as a transgender kindergartner. But this is the thing, the left's lunacy has turned the world into a parody of itself. They want us to join them in the upside down, to borrow a phrase from Stranger Things, an inverted moral hellscape where wrong and right are inverted and lies are true. And they aren't asking us, by the way. This is not a request. They're demanding that we join them or else. And I think one of the greatest contributions we can make to society at this point, beyond having lots of kids and raising them in the truth, is to stubbornly refuse, even if it costs us something. In fact, I think we should refuse, especially if it costs us something. Courage of that kind is contagious. And I think what's happening in women's sports is maybe the best illustration of where we need that kind of courage. Imagine if every time Leah Thomas, is that his name? Imagine if every time Leah Thomas jumped in the pool, he did so by himself. How long would this last? In a sort of ironic, insane way, women need to be willing to give up their sports to keep them, I think. There's a common misconception that a lot of people have. It's a very common misconception, actually, and I think it was alluded to a little bit in the introduction. And I think it's widespread, this idea that somehow our job is easier today than it's ever been because the world is so insane, and I have to say that couldn't be further from the truth. It couldn't be further. Satire exaggerates the reality to make a point. It goes in the direction the truth is already pointing, and it's like a caricature. It's just an exaggeration. How do you exaggerate what's going on in our world today? How do you go a step beyond reality without going into something that's so unbelievable no one could possibly believe it was true? Though I think the best way to put it, to kind of get it in perspective, is imagine if your job is to write jokes that are funnier than what Democrats are doing in real life. Go. See how you do. Imagine if your job is to write jokes that are funnier than a Kamala Harris speech. Come on. Good luck. And it's, we do manage to pull it off sometimes. He read some of those headlines. A couple of those were really recent, and they're funny. They're funny until they come true, and then it's kind of disconcerting. I want to show you, it's better to show than tell, and I mentioned that we have nearly 100 of these jokes that have come true, so I'm going to show you a few of them. I'm going to start with the Babylon Bee headline. I'll show you the joke, and then I'll show you a real, actual news headline that followed right on its heels. We'll start with this one here. Gavin Newsom named U-Haul Salesperson of the Year. It was a joke until this headline came out. Californians fleeing for Texas so fast, U-Haul runs out of trucks for them. To improve public perception, Kamala Harris taking likability lessons from Hillary Clinton. It has to be a joke. No one would ever do that. White House asked Hillary staffers how to make Kamala more likable. And what's so great about this too is the similarity in the pictures that we used. Like if you look at our joke and then the headline, you got cackling Kamala in both of them. Study finds anyone still wearing a mask at this point is probably just super ugly. We wrote this all the way back in 2021, April 23rd, 2021. This is an almost verbatim fulfillment of this prophecy. Unattractive individuals wear masks more often than others, study. It's funny because it's true. This is one of my all-time favorites. Trump, I have done more for Christianity than Jesus. This is a fun Trump joke. Trump says outlandish things from time to time. Rarely, every now and then. So this joke went crazy viral. The people on the left were sharing it because they believed it. They wanted to believe that this was true because they thought they could dunk on the president. So there were even New York Times reporters who shared this story thinking it was true. So of course Snopes had to step in and fact check it and rate it false. But we wrote it in 2019. Fast forward a little bit to 2021, October. Donald Trump says nobody has done more for Christianity than him. Speaking to Gene Bailey on Flashpoint, he said, nobody's done more for Christianity or for evangelicals or for religion itself than I have. He took it a step further. It's all religion. It's not just Christianity. So what do you do with a fact check for a story that's come true? Snopes has to update their processes, I guess. So this is a criticism. This is one of the chief criticisms that we get at the Babylon Bee is that our headlines are too believable. We're trying to dupe people with these believable headlines. We're skirting too close to the line. And, we purposefully duped your grandmother when she shared that fake story on Facebook. I just think it's a ridiculous criticism of comedy because this is the whole point of comedy is that there's truth to it. It's not funny if it's not true. You've all heard the saying, there's a grain of truth in every joke, or it's funny because it's true. We all recognize that. We understand that jokes are funny because of their proximity to the truth, not their distance from it. And apparently the left wants us to make jokes that are so impossible to believe that no one would ever think that they were true. And as we're finding, that's becoming more and more difficult to even create jokes that don't come true a day or two later. But the problem here isn't that satire is too close to reality. The problem is that reality is too close to satire. And that's not our fault. If the Bee goes out of business, I'm convinced it won't be because someone else is funnier. My mom told me there's no way that's possible. It will be because satire and reality have finally merged and become indistinguishable from each other. But the left is not course-correcting as they should be and going back in the direction of sanity. In fact, they're doubling down, and they aren't laughing. Instead, they're fact-checking jokes and rating them false. Jokes are no longer funny. They're dangerous misinformation. Our experience with the whole fact-checking apparatus dates back to 2018 when we made this joke about industrial-sized washing machine over at CNN that was being used to spin the news before publishing it. And honestly, I don't even think this joke is that funny because it's so dumb. I think that it got fact-checked and rated false is funny. And then Facebook told us that if we kept publishing fake news, they would demonetize and deplatform us because of this joke. That's funny. Way funnier than the joke. CNN praises Taliban for wearing masks during attack. Now, I want you to tell me, you guys answer this for me. If this is believable, whose fault is that? Mine? This was fact-checked and rated false because it went viral. People thought it was true. I love this one of my all-time favorites. Ocasio-Cortez appears on The Price is Right, guesses everything is free. That's a really good Photoshop, so I can see how it duped some people. But she's also stupid, so there's that. Ninth Circuit Court overturns death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. USA Today fact-checked this joke. And they cited 15 sources. I'm not kidding. You can look it up, Google it from your phone. 15 sources to refute this joke. And it was paid for, of course, by grants from Facebook. But National Review did a write-up on this and said it was the stupidest fact check in the history of fact checks. What does it even mean to overturn somebody's death? How does anybody take that seriously? It's insanity. Over the years, our jokes have been repeatedly fact-checked, flagged for hate speech, and removed for incitement to violence. We did a Monty Python joke about comparing Amy Coney Barrett to a duck to determine whether she was a witch, and it was so dumb. And it was flagged for incitement to violence, and then we appealed it, and a real person reviewed this, looked at it, and said, yep, that's incitement to violence, and upheld the original ruling. It's ridiculous. Even our email service at one point, MailChimp, suspended us for spreading harmful misinformation. So we found ourselves taking breaks from writing jokes to go on TV and defend our right to tell them in the first place, which is just an incredibly awkward position to be in as humorists in a free society. Last year, we made a joke that got us in a little bit of trouble, but had a decent outcome, I think. USA Today had named this beautiful woman one of their picks for Women of the Year. I think they had a handful of them that they nominated, and this was one of them. Just a gorgeous and brave woman. And so we did a satirical write-up on this, our response in defense of sanity and women everywhere. I hope this is offensive to women, by the way, this real story, not our joke. Much more offensive than this. Babylon Bee's Man of the Year is Rachel Levine. Twitter was not amused. They locked our account. We got a notice that we had violated their hateful conduct policy. We spent the next 8 months in Twitter jail. And this is a great example, I think, of how the system is rigged to protect the popular narrative. You know, big tech has been defending this fantasy world where 2 and 2 make 5 by censoring anybody who so much as jokes about what reality is actually like. And this is a key point, I think, that can't be overemphasized. Everyone needs to grasp this. Censorship guards the narrative, not the truth. And it often guards the narrative at the expense of the truth. We learned that with this joke. And I think some people are fine with this because they prioritize feelings over everything, including our rights and even reality itself. But never let it be said that those people care even a little bit about the spread of misinformation. They're always worried about fact-checking. They claim to care about misinformation, but you have no interest and fighting misinformation if you're trying to silence anyone who's still sane enough to refer to adult males as men. It's long past time to drop that laughable pretense. I should add here that Twitter went well beyond censorship, when instead of removing this joke, they could have taken it down themselves and said, look, we don't want that on our platform. We think that's offensive or inappropriate or sensitive content or whatever. They could have labeled it and deleted it themselves, but instead of doing that, they required us to delete it and admit that we engaged in hateful conduct. They wanted us to check a box that said, I admit that I violated the terms of service for hateful conduct, and delete the joke. That is not censorship, it's subjugation. We made our decision within 5 minutes that we were not going to be deleting the joke. And we announced that we wouldn't delete the joke, and we refused to. And we were willing to give up our Twitter account and never tweet again. What made this all the more outrageous, though, is when you actually looked at the hateful conduct policy on Twitter's website. They have this lip service commitment to free speech, and it's laughable. If you visit the site's policy on hateful conduct, you read this. Twitter's mission is to give everyone the power to create and share ideas and information, to express opinions and beliefs without barriers. Free expression is a human right. These are their words. This rings pretty hollow, I think, when you scroll down the page and then you read the policies about misgendering, dead naming, all of these things that get you permanently suspended. They've baked radical gender ideology into the terms of service so that even objectively true statements become enforceable policy violations. It's crazy. And it'd be one thing if these ideas were merely popular, but porting them into the terms of service of massive public platforms has taken them from mainstream to mandatory. You can't criticize them, and now, thanks to these hateful conduct policies, you can't even joke about them. Comedians are being canceled, and in some cases physically attacked for stepping out of line and telling an off-limits joke. Thankfully, there are some comedians who are pushing back on this. I give a lot of credit to Bill Maher for recently doing this monologue on the harm that comes about from gender-affirming care. I don't know if you guys saw this one. Gender-affirming, I'm putting in scare quotes. Let's put that in scare quotes because it's not gender-affirming care. It's mutilation and sterilization and castration and all of the above. He said, this is great, kids are fluid about everything. If they knew at age 8 what they wanted to be, the world would be filled with cowboys and princesses. I wanted to be a pirate. Thank God no one scheduled me for eye removal and peg leg surgery. Now, some will call that hate speech, but I think it's funny. The comedian's job, which Bill was doing when he made that joke, is to poke holes in the popular narrative. Whatever the narrative is, doesn't matter who's promoting it. If the popular narrative is off limits, then comedy itself is off limits. And that's basically where we find ourselves right now. The only reason Twitter is an exception is because the world's richest man took matters into his own hands and declared comedy legal again. This was cool to read. Someone sent me a link. I don't normally read the Washington Post. In fact, I never read the Washington Post, but I was sent a link. Said I had to read this one. The first paragraph of this story reported that when Elon Musk took over as CEO, he walked into the headquarters of Twitter, met with the trust and safety team, and issued an urgent directive: bring back the Babylon Bee. We've been trying to think of a joke worth $44 billion ever since. We did actually just interview him out at Twitter headquarters a couple weeks ago. I don't know if you guys have seen that yet, but we gave him an IOU for $44 billion. It was nice to finally make good on that debt. It's as good as money. It's an IOU. I hope, though, that we can all agree that we shouldn't have to depend on benevolent billionaires to safeguard speech. That's a function of the law. But the law protects against government censorship. It hasn't yet caught up to the fact that the vast majority of public discourse now takes place on privately owned platforms. So where's the law that protects us from them? The lovers of censorship will tell us that there can't be any such law. The Constitution won't allow it, but I think they're wrong and their arguments fail. I don't have time to address all of them, but just a couple really quickly. First, they say that private companies are free to do whatever they want, and I think that's nonsense, especially when applied to companies that serve a critical public function. A transportation service can't ban passengers based on their viewpoints, nor can telecom providers. Under common carrier doctrine, they're required to treat everyone equally, and that precedent applies comfortably to big tech. The argument that only the government can be guilty of censorship falls short because it fails to make a distinction between the way things are and the way they should be. If these platforms are the modern public square, as the Supreme Court has described them, then speech rights should be protected there, even if they presently are not. The current state of affairs being what they are is not a good argument for failing to take action to improve them. But beyond that, these platforms have explicitly promised us free expression without barriers. You can read it right there in Twitter's mission statement. To give us anything less than that is fraud. Secondly, they say these platforms have a First Amendment right to censor, as if censorship were a form of protected speech. It's a weird concept. I don't think it is. Censorship is a form of conduct. The state has always been able to regulate conduct. The idea that censorship is speech was forcefully rejected by the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in their recent decision to uphold an anti-discrimination law in Texas. The court mocked the idea that buried somewhere in the enumerated right to free speech lies a corporation's unenumerated right to muzzle speech. No such right exists, and how could it? The claim that censorship is speech is as nonsensical as saying war is peace or freedom is slavery. I think it's tempting to view the opposition that the Bee has faced as being an attack on comedy. I initially thought that when we were getting fact-checked to death and our jokes were coming true. But the attack is really aimed at truth and our right to speak it. The further we zoom out, the more it looks like comedy may just be collateral damage in that larger conflict. In 2021, Facebook announced they'd be changing the way they handle satire. They said they'd allow it, but with new limitations that prevent satirists from making jokes about marginalized people who lack power and privilege. True satire, they said, does not punch down. Satire that punches down, that is satire that takes aim at targets they don't want you joking about, would now be subject to censorship. In fact, they've made it clear they'll consider jokes that punch down to be hatred disguised as satire. They write, "Indeed, humor can be an effective mode of communicating hateful ideas." Now, just a quick thought about this whole punching down thing. I think this is the silliest thing in the world. I reject the whole concept that there's this, the number one rule of comedy is to not punch down. The number one rule of comedy is to be funny. And if you're writing a joke, it is. And they want you, we have to worry about the censors now when we're writing a joke, and this idea that punching down is prohibited. You have to sit there and think to yourself, well, okay, I'm a white, straight, Christian male. I've got to place myself into this hierarchy and think about who's beneath me. And then I've got to think to myself, you know what? I shouldn't joke about those people. They're beneath me. Seriously, that's the mentality they want you to adopt when you're writing jokes. I shouldn't joke about those people. They're beneath me. That's what the concept of punching down is reinforcing. This idea that there are people who are beneath you that you shouldn't be joking about. They have less power and privilege than you. The second reason that that's insane, besides the fact that it just reinforces stereotypes, inequality, it makes people think of themselves as better than others, it's condescending. There's a million things wrong with this. But the second thing is this idea that these people really are marginalized and oppressed. Is Dylan Mulvaney marginalized and oppressed? What does that word even mean? To be marginalized means to be forgotten, to be voiceless, to be powerless, right? Is Rachel Levine powerless? First of all, Rachel Levine is a white male, high-ranking government official. These are not marginalized people that we're talking about. They have tremendous power. In fact, they have the power to punish you if you so much as joke about them. That is scary power. I don't have that kind of power. You can say whatever you want about me. I don't have the power to silence you. If you have both the will and the power to punish whoever so much as makes a joke at your expense, you are an oppressor, you are a tyrant, you are not the oppressed. So I don't think Facebook, though, is trying to kill comedy by prohibiting jokes that allegedly punch down. That's not the purpose of the policy. This is not an attack on comedy. I think it's wrong-headed to think that way. What they're trying to do is keep something else alive, namely the kind of bad ideas that mockery tears down so effectively. Well, what are these bad ideas? I think the most obvious example is the gender madness that's running rampant in our culture. It's led to the denial of the most basic human facts, the most basic facts of human biology, facts we all agreed upon right up until about 10 minutes ago. It's an ideology loaded with wild, extremely mockable ideas. We're told, like I said earlier, women can become men, men can become women. We're told sex is assigned at birth, the most silly thing ever, as if doctors are just making their best guess when they observe a newborn baby. We don't know about this one. We'll let the kindergarten teacher decide, like that meme. We're told men can become pregnant and chest feed. These aren't fringe ideas promoted by radicals on Reddit. These are mainstream ideas. Go to healthline.com, type in, "Can men get pregnant?" and you'll get this answer, verbatim. Yes, it's possible for men to become pregnant and give birth to children of their own. In fact, it's probably a lot more common than you might think. In order to explain, we'll need to break down some common misconceptions about how we understand the term man. So the people who just answered yes to the question, "Can men get pregnant?" are going to clear up some misconceptions for us and tell us all about science and truth. That's very promising. So it'd be bad enough if these ideas were merely popular, but they've gone from mainstream to mandatory, like I said. And this all makes sense if you think about it. In order to prop up an insane worldview that can't be defended or even coherently articulated, you have to insulate it from criticism, especially the comedic kind that employs mockery to expose foolishness. It's embarrassing to be mocked and exposed for a fool. It can't be tolerated. So how did we get here? How did we end up in this place where insane ideas are not just popular, but sacred? And they are. They're sacred, untouchable. I think the answer is very simple and straightforward and obvious. We took bad ideas too seriously. Instead of laughing at absurdity, we accepted it. Instead of ridiculing bad ideas, we tolerated them. The absurd has become sacred only because it hasn't been sufficiently mocked. And the response I normally get when I say something like that is, "Well, wait a minute, isn't mockery mean? Isn't it cruel? Are you talking about bullying?" No, and you know what? It depends on what you mean by it and in the context in which you're employing it. We're not talking about mockery for the purpose of putting people down and making them feel bad. We're talking about using it as a tool to expose foolishness for what it is so that it isn't taken seriously. Mockery of this kind is a moral imperative for the obvious reason that bad ideas taken seriously have catastrophic consequences. Ask any mutilated teen who now regrets their gender transition surgery, or any inmate at a women's-only prison whose female cellmate got her pregnant. Imagine if the ideas that produced these results had been laughed at instead of lauded. Don't you think that would have made a difference? C.S. Lewis said that good philosophy must exist if for no other reason than because bad philosophy needs to be answered. And I think that's as true now as it's ever been. There's bad ideas everywhere, and social media is increasing the speed with which they spread and infect minds all over the world. There can never be enough opposition to them. They say evil prevails when good men do nothing, and I think that's true, but it's also true that madness prevails when sane men say nothing. We cannot preserve sanity with silence. Joe Rogan said the funniest comedy right now is coming from the Babylon Bee. They're so consistently funny because the funniest stuff right now is woke stuff. He wasn't saying stuff. I'm inserting that word in there in place of the word he was using. The funniest stuff right now is woke stuff, and that's the stuff people on the left can't touch. He's right. But it's not just that wokeness is hysterical. It is. It also happens to be harmful. The first time we interviewed Elon Musk, he called wokeness a mind virus and said it's one of the greatest threats to modern civilization. And I asked him why he thought it was so dangerous and destructive, and this was his response after he stopped to think for a moment. He said, "At its heart, wokeness is divisive, exclusionary, and hateful. It basically gives mean people a shield to be cruel while armored in false virtue." I couldn't agree more, and that's why we target wokeness so much with our humor. Bad ideas don't need to just be refuted, they need to be ridiculed. They need to be mocked. So many things are off limits in comedy right now, and people think that represents progress. They honestly think that we've improved morally because we make fun of fewer things. And I get it, I understand why initially that you can think that way. But those people are idiots. Sorry. We're more depraved than ever because we're affirming and accepting what we should be ridiculing and rejecting. At the Babylon Bee, we are just satirists. We write jokes on the internet for a living. We are expert online trolls. But somehow we found ourselves on the front lines of a battle for the preservation of freedom and the restoration of sanity, and I have no idea how that happened. I don't know. But I do know that satire is never more necessary than when reality and rationality are under attack. You can't refute claims that are rooted in relativism where truth itself is a moving target. You can't reason with people who've abandoned rationality on purpose, but you can and you must ridicule their bad ideas. Nothing, after all, undercuts lunacy and lies like laughter. Thank you.